Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Your panel was specifically looking at quantitative easing and the effects it's had. What's the impact been on the pensions industry, if you can summarise that?
So, the myth out there is that quantitative easing has been bad for pension funds. So if you look back at the 2009 Purple Book and you look at where people invested and what they had hedged, then our liabilities have gone up by about 500 billion by the fall in bond yields. Our assets will have gone up by about 400 billion by the movement in equities and other assets. So we're about 100 billion worse off on the straight numbers, which you'd say, well, that's 8% increase in our deficit, that's terrible. But that doesn't look at the counterfactual. And I think if you look at the counterfactual, that we could have had a period of disinflation, we could have had a depression, the effect of that on pension funds would have been significantly worse than what we have. We may actually have interest rates where they were anyway, but without any of the growth. And if you think about that from a covenant perspective, 1,000 companies that started off when the PPF was set up have gone into it out of 6,000. How many might that have been if we'd gone through depression in that period? And that might have taken the PPF down. So I think from a pension fund perspective, actually, we should be pleased about QE. And to the extent that the deficits have increased, that's not QE's fault, that's our fault for not managing our asset liability match properly. The annuity industry has not got into the same problems that we've got into.
So what can we do about that, and what's pensions got to do? What's on the horizon?
I think we have to change our mindset in how we manage pensions. When I came into this in 2010, I thought this was an investment role, and that our job was to decide if interest rates were going to go up or going to go down. And actually, that's not our role. Our role is to increase the financial security of the benefits promised to our members. That's what we should be focused on doing. And therefore our role is predominantly a risk role. And therefore the questions we should be asking ourselves are around about covenant first. So if the outlook for the world doesn't pan out as we expect, what does that mean? So if interest rates do fall, what does that mean for your covenant? What does that mean for the affordability of pension contributions? And what does that mean for your members in terms of downside risk? When you change your mindset to look at it from that, you come to different answers.
They don't have a crystal ball though at the same time, do they? So what do they do to mitigate?
So you manage downside. So you don't run risks that you can't afford to get out of, and so your members end up in the PPF. And it's about changing your mindset to not running risks, from trying to be overly clever and work out with a crystal ball what the future holds, because we don't know. So manage for a range of outcomes so that none of them take you over the edge.
So good scenario planning?
Yes, and good risk management. And integrated risk management, so you're not just looking at what are interest rates going to do, you're going to look at your assets, you're going to look at your liabilities, you're going to look at your covenant. You're going to integrate the three and work out what the best outcomes can be and what the worst outcomes can be.
Do you think comings together like this conference are a useful sort of tool in that? Because it can kind of perhaps encourage a more collaborative approach and a broader picture sort of outlook.
Well, I mean, the industry is a relatively collaborative industry. We have the advantage that we don't compete with each other, apart from occasionally for private market assets and things. So actually, we mostly know each other, collaborate anyway well in terms of trying to ensure that we get best outcomes for our members, which is what it's about. And so these definitely facilitate that collaboration.
What do you see happening next? Because there's talk about interest rates going up, that quantitative tightening might happen. What do you see as on the horizon next?
So I've realised I have no ability to predict long-term interest rates. That's one of the things I've learned in this role. So I don't try and predict them. So what I try and do, and it gets back to my earlier point, is manage the pension fund for a range of different outcomes, so that we can cope if interest rates go up, we can cope if they go down. The risks as we see them today for the industry are if interest rates go up, a lot of people have got leveraged LDI positions, leveraged through repo in sometimes 3 times leveraged funds. And I think the question people should be asking their managers is, what increase in real rates can we sustain before we run out of collateral? Because that's one of the big risks that sits out there if interest rates do rise.
With all of what you've said in mind, I spoke earlier to another delegate who talked about short-termism creeping into this industry. Often happens at perhaps the anticipated end of the credit cycle. Do you see, as she did, that long-termism is even more important in an environment like this?
So long-termism is always important because we're trying to solve a problem that's a 30 to 70 year problem. We need to be aware of the medium term, particularly in relation to covenant, and I think people don't do anything like enough work on covenant in that scenario. But long-termism should be all we ever consider about.
your responsibility lies with those members that depend on it for their income in retirement, after all.
So we talk about doing things that our successor's successor will not complain about. That's how we think about our role.
And this is a chance to talk to your colleagues, as you said, about how to do that too.
We try and share those ideas where we can, and receive ideas back from our colleagues.
And hopefully here in Edinburgh you can have some of those conversations with your colleagues to bring that about.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to be at the PLSA, to mix with a lot of the pension funds, both large and small, DC and DB, different perspectives, exchange ideas, and try and find the best way forward for our members.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Emma.